The morning light from 3 different suns painted the Galactic Academy's main hall in shades of gold, blue, and purple. Dr. Kira Velthara stood at the massive viewing window, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. Today was selection day for the most important research program in known space. Behind her, the Academy's crystal walls hummed with energy. The building itself was alive, grown from the minds of her own people, the Zephyrians. Every surface could display information. Every corridor could reshape itself as needed. It was a place where the greatest minds in the galaxy came to push the boundaries of science. Dr. Velthara was the most respected researcher at the Academy. Her blue skin shifted colors with her thoughts, and her large eyes held the wisdom of someone who had lived for over 300 years. She had made discoveries that changed how entire civilizations understood the universe. When she spoke, even the Academy's directors listened. For the past 847 years, her research program had only accepted candidates from her own species. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their ability to think in multiple directions at once. A single Zephyrian could process 17 different thoughts simultaneously, making them perfect for complex scientific work. But this year felt different. The first candidate arrived at exactly 9 in the morning. Commander Thexler of the Vorthan Empire walked into the interview room with the confidence of someone who had never failed at anything. The Vorthans were living computers, their brains capable of solving mathematical problems that would take other species years to understand. Dr. Velthara, Thexler said, his metallic voice carrying the weight of authority, I have solved the galactic paradox. I have calculated the probability of life existing in parallel dimensions. I have designed engines that can travel faster than light without breaking the laws of physics. Dr. Velthara studied the holographic display of his achievements. Each accomplishment was genuinely impressive. The galactic paradox had puzzled scientists for centuries. His faster-than-light engine designs were already being used by half the galaxy's military forces. Tell me about failure, she said quietly. Thexler's metallic face showed confusion. I do not understand the question. I have never failed at a task I set my mind to. That will be all, Dr. Velthara said. Thank you for your time. The Vorthan left the room looking as confused as his rigid features would allow. In the hallway, he passed the next candidate without acknowledgement. Seraphim Melody Heart floated into the room on wings that seemed to be made of pure light. The Seraphim were emotional beings, capable of feeling the thoughts and feelings of entire star systems. They could read the emotional patterns of a planet and predict social changes centuries in advance. Honored Dr. Velthara, Melody Heart sang, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal walls resonate. I have prevented 3 wars by understanding the emotional needs of conflicting species. I have helped dying civilizations find peace by teaching them to process grief. I have mapped the emotional structure of the galaxy itself. Again, Dr. Velthara was impressed. The Seraphim's achievements were remarkable. She had single-handedly prevented conflicts that could have destroyed billions of lives. Her emotional maps were used by diplomats across the galaxy. What makes you angry? Dr. Velthara asked. Melody Heart's light dimmed slightly. I do not experience anger. My species evolved beyond such primitive emotions millennia ago. We exist in a state of perfect emotional balance. Thank you for your time, Dr. Velthara said. The day continued with similar interviews. A Nexari engineer who had built self-replicating robots but had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with technology. A crystalline philosopher who had achieved perfect logical thinking but had never made a mistake. A quantum being who existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously but had never experienced doubt. Each candidate was exceptional. Each had achievements that would make them legends in their fields. Each was politely dismissed by Dr. Velthara. By evening, the Academy's administrators were growing concerned. Dean Zorthak, a fellow Zephyrian with skin that shifted between worried shades of green and blue, approached Dr. Velthara in her office. Kira, you have rejected every candidate. Some of the greatest minds in the galaxy applied for your program. The Vorthan who solved the galactic paradox. The Seraphim who prevented the War of Three Suns. The Nexari who designed the Academy's defense systems. Why are none of them suitable? Dr. Velthara looked up from her desk, where she had been reviewing the day's interviews. They are all perfect at what they do, Zorthak. Too perfect. I do not understand. They have never failed. They have never been wrong. They have never had to improvise or adapt or find a solution that shouldn't work but does. Dr. Velthara's skin shifted to a deep purple, indicating deep thought. For the project I have in mind, perfection might be the greatest weakness. Dean Zorthak was about to respond when Dr. Velthara's communication device chimed. A new application had arrived, submitted just minutes before the deadline. The file header made both Zephyrians pause. Species, human, homeworld, Earth, a planet. In one of the galaxy's outer spiral arms, inhabited by beings barely out of their technological infancy. This must be a mistake, Dean Zorthak said. Humans are not even a spacefaring species. How did they even learn about the program? Dr. Velthara opened the file. The application was simple, almost primitive compared to the others she had received. The candidate's name was Jake Morrison, a 34-year-old former military engineer. His education consisted of a single degree from something called State University. His work experience included military service and a job fixing machinery for a civilian company, but there was something else in the file that caught Dr. Velthara's attention, a section titled Personal Interests and Hobbies. Most candidates had left this section blank or filled it with additional professional achievements. Jake Morrison had written, "I like fixing things that are broken. Sometimes I break things just to see if I can fix them better than they were before." Dr. Velthara read the line again. Then she read it a third time. "Schedule an interview," she said quietly, "with the human." Dean Zorthak's skin shifted to a shocked yellow. "Kira, humans are barely more advanced than primitive tool users. They have only recently discovered how to travel to their own moon. They are not suitable for advanced xenobiological research." "Schedule the interview," Dr. Velthara repeated, her voice carrying the tone that meant the discussion was over. 3 days later, Jake Morrison stood in the Academy's main hall, looking around with the wide eyes of someone who had never seen anything like it. He was shorter than most of the galaxy's species, with brown hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were simple and practical, nothing like the formal robes or technological suits worn by the other candidates. Several aliens stopped to stare at him as he walked through the halls. Humans were known throughout the galaxy, but mostly as a curiosity. They were the species that had somehow managed to split the atom before they learned to travel between stars. They were known for their wars, their art, their strange ability to form emotional bonds with other species, and their tendency to find solutions to problems in ways that made no logical sense. Jake Morrison didn't seem bothered by the attention. He smiled and nodded at the aliens he passed, as if meeting beings from other worlds was the most natural thing in the galaxy. When he reached Dr. Velthara's office, he paused at the door. Through the crystal walls, he could see the Zephyrian researcher studying what appeared to be a holographic display of his entire life history. He knocked on the door. "Come in," Dr. Velthara said. Jake entered the office and looked around with obvious interest. The walls were covered with research data, star charts, and images of creatures from across the galaxy. Some of the creatures were beautiful, others were terrifying, and a few seemed to exist in dimensions that hurt to look at directly. "You are Jake Morrison," Dr. Velthara said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, then caught himself. "I mean, yes, doctor. I'm not sure what the proper address is for someone of your species." "Doctor is fine," Dr. Velthara said, and Jake thought he detected something like amusement in her voice. "Tell me, Jake Morrison, why do you want to participate in my research program?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not sure I'm qualified. I've read about your work, and it's far beyond anything I've ever encountered." but I've spent my whole life fixing things that were broken. And I've always been good at finding solutions that other people missed. I thought maybe that skill might be useful, even if I don't have all the advanced education that other candidates have. Dr. Velthara's skin shifted to a thoughtful blue. What is the most difficult problem you have ever solved? Jake smiled. There was a communication array on my military base that had been broken for months. Engineers from 3 different companies had tried to fix it, but it kept failing. The problem was that everyone was trying to fix it the right way, following the technical manuals and using the proper procedures. I looked at it and realized that the original designers had made a mistake. The array would work perfectly if you just ignored the manual. News of Dr. Velthara's choice spread through the galaxy faster than a solar flare. Within hours, every major news network was running the same story. The most brilliant xenobiologist in known space had selected a primitive human over candidates. From the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, the reaction was immediate and intense. On the crystal worlds of the Zephyrian Empire, citizens gathered in public spaces to watch the news broadcasts with disbelief. The Vorthan High Council called an emergency session to discuss what they viewed as an insult to their entire species. The Seraphim Collective sent waves of confused emotional energy across their star system. Dr. Velthara's communication device hadn't stopped chiming since the announcement. Messages poured in from colleagues, former students, and complete strangers. Most wanted to know if she had suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Others suggested she was conducting an elaborate experiment to prove a point about failure. She ignored them all and continued. Preparing her laboratory for Jake Morrison's arrival, the human transport ship was small and crude compared to the elegant vessels that usually docked at the Academy. Jake Morrison emerged from the airlock carrying a single bag and looking around with the same curious expression he had worn during his interview. Several Academy staff members stopped their work to stare at him as he walked through the corridors. Dr. Velthara is waiting for you in Laboratory 7, said Assistant Director Nexler, a tall Nexari whose mechanical implants clicked softly as he moved. His voice carried the slight distortion that came from artificial vocal cords. I must say, Mr. Morrison, your selection has caused quite a stir. Jake nodded. I figured it might. I'm still not entirely sure why she chose me. Neither is anyone else, Nexler replied, then seemed to realize how that sounded. What I mean is, your qualifications are quite different from our usual candidates. You mean I'm not qualified at all? Jake said with a smile that took the sting out of the words. It's okay. I know what I am and what I'm not. I'm just hoping I can be useful. Laboratory 7 was larger than any room Jake had ever been in. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds had formed near the top. The walls were covered with displays showing star charts, genetic sequences, and mathematical equations that seemed to move and change as he watched them. In the center of the room stood Dr. Velthara, her blue skin shifting through various shades as she worked with equipment that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Jake Morrison, she said without looking up from her work. Welcome to the Academy. Thank you for having me, Jake replied, setting his bag down and looking around the laboratory. This is incredible. I've never seen anything like it. Most humans have not, Dr. Velthara agreed. Your species has only recently begun to explore beyond your home planet. You are the first human to set foot in this laboratory. Jake walked closer to where she was working. The equipment was beautiful in a way that seemed almost alive. Crystals grew from metal bases, and energy flowed between them in patterns that reminded him of lightning frozen in time. What are you working on? For the first time since he had arrived, Dr. Velthara looked up from her equipment. Her large eyes studied his face carefully. Before I show you, I need to know something. Why did you really apply for this program? Jake was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I was curious. I heard about your work from a trader who visited Earth. He said you were trying to understand creatures that exist in the spaces between stars. That sounded like the kind of problem that might need someone who thinks differently. And you believe. You think differently? I know I do, Jake said simply. I've been told my whole life that I approach problems wrong. I don't follow the proper procedures. I don't use the right tools. I don't think the way I'm supposed to think. But sometimes that's exactly what a problem needs. Dr. Velthara. Skin shifted to a deep purple, the color of intense thought. Come with me? She led him to a sealed chamber at the far end of the laboratory. The walls here were thicker, made of some kind of metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dr. Velthara placed her hand on a scanner, and the chamber door opened with a soft hiss. Inside was something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. The creature floating in the center of the chamber was enormous, easily the size of a small building. It looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a storm cloud, with tendrils that seemed to bend the space around them. Its body was translucent, and Jake could see what looked like stars flowing through its veins. Despite its size, it seemed to exist in perfect stillness, as if it were sleeping. This is a void leviathan, Dr. Velthara said quietly. It comes from the space between galaxies, where matter and energy exist in forms we barely understand. It has been in stasis for over 10,000 years. Jake stared at the creature, unable to speak. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Even in its dormant state, he could feel a presence coming from it, as if it were aware of their presence. We believe it holds the key to understanding dark matter, Dr. Velthara continued. The substance that makes up most of the universe, but which we cannot see or touch. If we could learn to manipulate dark matter, we could revolutionize space travel, energy production, and our understanding of reality itself. It's incredible, Jake whispered. But I still don't understand how I can help with something like this. Dr. Velthara walked to a control panel and activated a holographic display. The display showed a timeline stretching back decades, filled with the names and achievements of some of the galaxy's greatest minds. Every species in the galaxy has tried to establish communication with it, she said. The Vorthans created mathematical models to predict its behavior. They built quantum computers that could process millions of equations simultaneously. They approached it with perfect logic and flawless calculations. The display showed images of Vorthan scientists working with technology that looked like it belonged in a dream. Their efforts were impressive, but the timeline showed that all their attempts had failed. The Seraphim tried emotional resonance, Dr. Velthara continued. They believed that consciousness was fundamentally emotional, so they composed symphonies designed to reach the creature's feelings. They projected waves of joy, curiosity, and welcome across multiple dimensions. The next section of the display showed seraphim beings of light creating patterns of emotion that were beautiful to watch. But again, the timeline showed failure. The Nexari built technological interfaces, Dr. Velthara said. They created machines that could translate any form of communication into any other form. They built quantum networks that could connect with any type of intelligence, no matter how alien. The display showed Nexari engineers working with technology that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Their machines were elegant and sophisticated, but they too had failed to wake the void leviathan. 43 different species have tried, Dr. Velthara said. Each brought their greatest strengths. The Zephyrians used multidimensional thinking. The Etherians tried quantum consciousness transfer. The architects built structures that existed in folded space-time. Jake looked at the long list of failures, then back at the sleeping creature. They all failed. Every single one, Dr. Velthara confirmed. Each species approached the problem using their greatest strengths, their most advanced capabilities, their most sophisticated understanding of the universe. And you think I might succeed where they failed? Jake asked. I don't have advanced capabilities. I don't have sophisticated understanding. I'm just a human who fixes things. Dr. Velthara's skin shifted to a color Jake had never seen before, something between gold and silver. That is exactly why I chose you, Jake Morrison. Every species that has tried to communicate with the Void Leviathan has used their strengths. They have been logical, emotional, technological, and perfect. She paused, looking at the creature floating in its chamber. But what if the solution doesn't require strength? What if it requires something else entirely? What if it requires someone? who was willing to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to try things that shouldn't work. Jake studied the creature more carefully. Despite its alien nature, there was something about it that reminded him of broken machines he had fixed. Not the obvious kind of broken, but the subtle kind that required understanding what the machine was trying to do rather than what it was supposed to do. "You think it's not really sleeping," he said slowly. "You think it's stuck?" Dr. Velthara's eyes widened. "What makes you say that?" "I've seen machines that looked like they were turned off but were actually jammed. The power was there, the systems were there, but something was preventing them from working properly. They needed someone to find the right wire to jiggle, the right component to adjust, the right place to apply pressure. The other species assumed it was dormant by choice," Dr. Velthara said. "They tried to wake it up politely, to communicate with it properly, to approach it with respect and sophisticated methods. But if it's stuck," Jake said, "then it doesn't need sophisticated methods. It needs someone who isn't afraid to try things that might not work." Dr. Velthara's skin shifted to a brilliant blue, the color of excitement and hope. "Jake Morrison, I chose you because humans have something that no other species in the galaxy possesses." Jake spent the first week studying everything the other species had tried. Dr. Velthara gave him access to the Academy's complete research files, and he read through decades of attempts to communicate with the Void Leviathan. The amount of work was staggering. The Vorthans had built mathematical models that filled entire data centers. Their equations described the creature's energy patterns, its dimensional properties, and its quantum signatures down to the smallest detail. They had calculated every possible approach to communication and tested each one methodically. The Seraphim had created emotional maps of the creature's consciousness. They had identified what they believed were feeling centers within its vast body and had composed symphonies designed to resonate with each one. Their music was beautiful enough to move entire civilizations to tears. The Nexari had constructed technological marvels that could translate between any two forms of communication in the known universe. Their machines could convert thought patterns into quantum fluctuations, emotional states into mathematical equations, and even dreams into physical reality. Jake read through it all, making notes in his simple human handwriting while surrounded by holographic displays that showed the work of the galaxy's greatest minds. His notes were basic compared to the sophisticated analyses he was reading, but they focused on practical questions that the other species seemed to have overlooked. "Why does it stay in the same position?" he wrote. "Why doesn't it move at all? Even slightly? If it's just sleeping, wouldn't it shift sometimes? The energy readings are perfectly stable, too stable. Nothing in nature is that consistent unless something is holding it in place." All the attempts to communicate focused on sending messages to it. Did anyone try to listen first? Dr. Velthara found him on the 7th day, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the laboratory with paper notes scattered around him. She had never seen anyone work this way before. Most researchers used holographic displays and quantum computers. Jake Morrison was solving problems with a pen and paper. "Have you reached any conclusions?" she asked. Jake looked up from his notes. "I think everyone has been trying to solve the wrong problem." "What do you mean?" "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to a chart he had drawn by hand. Every species tried to wake it up or communicate with it, but none of them asked the basic question: what if it's already awake and trying to communicate, but something is preventing it from doing so? Dr. Velthara's skin shifted to a thoughtful blue. "You believe it is trapped?" "I think it's stuck," Jake said, "like a machine that has power but can't start because one component is jammed. The Vorthans, the Seraphim, the Nexari, they all assumed it was dormant. But what if it's been trying to respond to their attempts all along, and they just couldn't hear it? That would mean it's probably been getting more and more frustrated over the years as species after species tried to talk to it and then gave up when it couldn't respond." Dr. Velthara stared at Jake's simple hand-drawn charts. The human had spent a week reading through decades of research and had come to a conclusion that had never occurred to the galaxy's greatest minds. How do you propose we test this theory? Jake stood up and walked to the sealed chamber where the void Leviathan waited. We start by listening instead of talking, but not with sophisticated equipment. Everything the other species used was too complex, too perfect. If this creature is stuck, it needs something simpler. What do you have in mind? Jake smiled, and Dr. Velthara was beginning to recognize that expression. It was the look Jake got when he was about to do something that shouldn't work but probably would. I want to build something that shouldn't function properly, Jake said. Something that's imperfect and messy and probably violates a few laws of physics. Over the next 3 days, Jake did something that horrified the Academy's other researchers. He took apart a Nexari quantum interface, one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology in the galaxy. The device was worth more than most planets, and Jake was dismantling it with basic tools. What are you doing? Assistant Director Nexler asked, his mechanical implants clicking with distress as he watched Jake work. I'm making it worse, Jake replied cheerfully, pulling out a component that pulsed with contained energy. The Nexari built this to work perfectly, but perfect might be the problem. He connected the quantum interface to a Vorthan mathematical processor, but not in the way it was designed to be connected. Instead of using the proper quantum channels, he ran the connection through what appeared to be a simple copper wire. Then he added a Seraphim emotional resonator, but he deliberately tuned it slightly off-key. This is madness, Nexler said. You're combining technologies that were never meant to work together. The quantum instability alone could destroy the entire laboratory. It might, Jake agreed, but it also might work. Sometimes the best solutions come from combining things that shouldn't go together. Dr. Velthara watched Jake work with fascination. His methods were completely contrary to everything she had learned about proper scientific procedure. He was breaking rules that had been established over thousands of years of galactic civilization. He was also creating something that looked like it might actually function. The device Jake built was ugly. It was a collection of advanced alien technology held together with what appeared to be metal clamps and electrical tape. It hummed with unstable energy and occasionally sparked in ways that made the Academy's safety systems issue warnings. It's ready, Jake announced. Are you certain it will work? Dr. Velthara asked. I'm certain it shouldn't work, Jake replied. But that might be exactly what we need. They moved the device into the chamber with the void Leviathan. Jake connected it to the Academy's power systems, made a few final adjustments with what appeared to be a basic wrench, and activated it. For a moment, nothing happened. The device hummed and sparked, energy flowed in patterns that violated several laws of physics, and the void Leviathan remained perfectly still. Then something extraordinary occurred. The creature's tendrils began to move, not with the graceful, controlled movements that the other species had expected, but with small, tentative shifts that reminded Jake of someone stretching after being stuck in the same position for too long. It's working, Dr. Velthara whispered, but Jake was already making adjustments to his device. Not yet. It's trying to respond, but something is still blocking it, like a radio that's almost tuned to the right frequency. He hit the device with his wrench, and the humming changed pitch. The void Leviathan's movements became more pronounced. He adjusted a setting that probably shouldn't have existed, and the creature's entire body began to pulse with new energy. There, Jake said, stepping back from his improvised machine. I think we're getting through. The void Leviathan's response was not what anyone had expected. Instead of the sophisticated communication patterns that the other species had tried to establish, the creature began to project something much simpler: loneliness. The emotion was so pure and powerful that it filled the chamber. Jake felt it wash over him like a wave of sadness that had been building for thousands of years. The creature wasn't just stuck physically. It was isolated, cut off from its own kind, drifting through the space between galaxies with no one to talk to. It's been alone, Jake said softly. All this time, it's been alone and trying to find someone who could understand. Dr. Velthara's skin shifted through a spectrum of colors as she processed what was happening. But why did it respond to your device when it ignored the others? Jake looked at his ugly, improvised machine, then at the void Leviathan, which was now moving with increasing animation. Because it's not perfect. It's messy and imperfect and probably shouldn't work. Maybe that's what the creature needed. Not perfection, but something that understood what it was like to be broken. The void Leviathan's tendrils reached toward Jake's device, and energy began to flow between them. But this wasn't the controlled, measured energy exchange that the other species had attempted. This was chaotic, unpredictable, and somehow completely natural. It's trying to communicate, Dr. Velthara said. No, Jake corrected, watching the energy patterns with growing understanding. It's trying to connect. There's a difference. The creature's communication wasn't coming in the form of mathematical equations or emotional symphonies or technological data streams. It was coming as something much more basic, friendship. The void Leviathan had been alone for so long that it had forgotten how to communicate properly. It was like someone who had been isolated for years and had lost the ability to make normal conversation. It needed someone who could understand that sometimes the best communication wasn't about being clear or sophisticated. Sometimes it was about being patient and accepting and willing to work with whatever connection was possible. Jake adjusted his device again, this time more gently. Hey there, he said quietly to the creature. I know you've been stuck for a long time. I know it's been lonely. But you're not alone anymore. The void Leviathan's response was immediate and powerful. Energy flowed from it to Jake's device, and suddenly the laboratory was filled with images and sensations that came from the space between galaxies. Jake saw stars being born in the void, dark matter streams flowing like rivers of invisible light and vast networks. The news of Jake's breakthrough spread through the galaxy even faster than the original announcement of his selection. Within hours, every major research institution was demanding access to the data. Within days, representatives from dozens of species were requesting permission to visit the Academy. The reaction was not what Dr. Velthara had expected. Instead of celebration, there was confusion and frustration. The galaxy's most advanced minds could not understand how a primitive human had succeeded where they had failed. The mathematical models didn't support it. The emotional patterns made no sense. The technological principles were completely wrong, Commander. Vexver of the Vorthan Empire arrived at the Academy 3 days after the breakthrough, demanding to see Jake's work. His metallic face showed the closest thing to anger that Vorthan features could display. This is impossible, he declared after reviewing the data. The human's device violates basic principles of quantum mechanics. It should not function at all, much less establish communication with a void Leviathan. Dr. Velthara led him to the observation chamber where Jake was working with the creature. The void Leviathan had become much more active since their first connection. Its tendrils moved in complex patterns, and energy flowed between it and Jake's improvised device in waves of light and color. And yet it does function, Dr. Velthara replied. Better than any of our previous attempts. Vexver studied Jake's device with the intense focus of someone trying to solve an equation that refused to make sense. The quantum interface is connected incorrectly. The mathematical processor is running calculations that produce impossible results. The emotional resonator is tuned to frequencies that should not exist. That's the point, Jake said without looking up from his work. He was making adjustments to the device while carrying on what appeared to be a conversation with the void Leviathan. Sometimes the wrong way is the right way. That statement has no logical meaning, Vexver protested. Jake finally looked up from his work. Can you tell me why you failed to communicate with it? Vexver's metallic features shifted slightly. My calculations were perfect. My approach was flawless. The mathematical models predicted successful communication with 97% probability. But you never asked what the creature wanted, Jake said. You decided how communication should work and then tried to force it to work that way. What if the creature didn't want perfect mathematical communication? What if it wanted something else? Such as what? Jake gestured toward the void Leviathan, which was now projecting images of its journey through the space between galaxies. The images were not precise or organized. They flowed together like memories from a dream, showing glimpses of cosmic phenomena that existed beyond normal understanding. Friendship, Jake said simply. It's been alone for thousands of years. It doesn't want data exchange or logical conversation. It wants someone to understand that being alone in the void is scary and that it's okay to be imperfect and confused sometimes. Seraphim Melody Heart arrived the next day, her light-based form flickering with emotions that Jake was learning to recognize as deep confusion. She observed Jake's work with the intensity of someone trying to understand a language that had no words. The emotional resonance is chaotic, she sang, her voice carrying harmonics of distress. There is no pattern, no structure, no organized emotional flow. How can this create meaningful communication? Dr. Velthara watched as Jake made another adjustment to his device. The Void Leviathan responded by sharing what appeared to be a memory of watching stars die in distant galaxies. The emotion that came with the memory was complex and difficult to understand, a mixture of sadness and wonder and acceptance that didn't fit into any organized emotional category. Perhaps that is the point, Dr. Velthara said. Perhaps meaningful communication does not always require organization. Melody Heart's light dimmed. But without emotional structure, how can true understanding occur? My species has mapped the emotional patterns of consciousness itself. We know how feelings work, how they connect beings across space and time. You know how perfect feelings work, Jake corrected gently. But what about imperfect feelings? What about emotions that don't fit into categories? What about the feeling of being lost and confused and still trying to connect with others anyway? The seraphim was silent for a long moment. My species evolved beyond such primitive emotional states long ago. Maybe that's why you couldn't communicate with it, Jake said. It's not looking for perfect emotional understanding. It's looking for someone who knows what it's like to feel lost and still keep trying. The Nexari engineer arrived on the third day with a team of technicians and a cargo hold full of advanced equipment. They spent hours analyzing Jake's device with instruments that could measure quantum fluctuations down to the smallest possible scale. The technology should not work, announced Chief Engineer Vertek, his mechanical implants clicking with rapid calculations. The components are incompatible. The power flows violate established principles. The quantum states are unstable. I know, Jake said. I built it that way on purpose. Vertek's optical sensors focused on Jake with laser precision. Why would you deliberately create unstable technology? Jake was adding what appeared to be a piece of ordinary copper wire to his device while the Void Leviathan projected images of cosmic storms that raged in the empty spaces between galaxies. The images were beautiful and terrifying, showing forces that could tear apart entire star systems. Because stable technology would have been too predictable, Jake explained. The creature has been stuck for thousands of years because everyone approached it with stable, predictable methods. Sometimes you need to break the rules to fix what's broken. But breaking rules leads to chaos, Vertek protested. Sometimes, Jake agreed. But sometimes chaos leads to connection. Look. He pointed to the Void Leviathan, which was now showing them something new. The images it projected were not just memories of its journey through space. They were memories of other creatures like itself, a vast network of Void Leviathans that existed in the spaces between galaxies, connected by forms of communication that defied conventional understanding. It's not just one creature, Dr. Velthara realized. It's part of a community, a species that exists in the void itself. The images showed how the Void Leviathans communicated with each other across impossible distances using methods that looked more like art than science. They painted with dark matter, sang with gravitational waves, and danced with the fundamental forces of the universe. Their communication was messy and beautiful and completely chaotic. This one got separated from the others, Jake said, watching. The creature's memories with growing understanding. It's been trying to get back to them, but it couldn't remember how their communication worked. It's been stuck trying to use the organized methods that other species expected instead of the chaotic methods that come naturally to its kind. Vortex studied the images with increasing fascination. The communication patterns they use should be impossible to maintain across galactic distances. They work because they're not trying to be perfect, Jake replied. They're trying to be expressive. Sometimes expression is more important than precision. Over the following days, more representatives arrived from across the galaxy. Each species came with their own explanations for why Jake's success was impossible. Their own theories about what had really happened, their own certainties about how the universe should work. Jake ignored most of them and continued working with the Void Leviathan. Together, they were developing a form of communication that was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. It was part technology, part art, part emotion, and part pure creative chaos. It shouldn't have worked according to any known scientific principles, but it did work, and that was changing everything. The creature began sharing more than just memories. It shared knowledge about dark matter that revolutionized physics. It shared insights about consciousness that changed philosophy. It shared methods of space travel that made faster-than-light engines look like primitive toys. But more importantly, it shared friendship with someone who understood that being imperfect was not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be celebrated. Dr. Velthara watched Jake work and realized that her choice had been about more than just solving a scientific problem. She had chosen Jake because humans represented something the galaxy had forgotten in its pursuit of perfection, the courage to be wonderfully, creatively, productively wrong. The implications are staggering, she told Jake during one of their late-night work sessions. If humans can communicate with void leviathans, what other cosmic mysteries might you be able to unravel simply by approaching them with your unique perspective? Jake looked up from the device he was modifying, a combination of alien technology and human ingenuity that was now capable of maintaining stable communication across dimensional barriers. I think that's the wrong question, he said. What do? You mean, the question isn't what mysteries humans can solve? The question is what mysteries we can solve together. The creature taught me something important. Connection isn't about one species being superior to others. It's about different kinds of minds working together in ways that create something new. The Void Leviathan pulsed with agreement. 6 months after Jake Morrison's breakthrough, the Galactic Academy was a completely different place. The pristine crystal halls now hummed with the organized chaos that seemed to follow human problem-solving wherever it went. Equipment that had once been perfectly arranged was now modified, adjusted, and combined in ways that made the Academy's maintenance staff nervous, but produced results that amazed the galaxy's greatest minds. Jake had become the first human professor at the Academy, though his title was unlike any that had existed before. He was officially designated as the Professor of Applied Improvisation in Xenobiology, a position that had been created specifically for him when the administration realized they had no existing category for what he did. His first class had been scheduled for 50 students. Over 300 applied. Representatives from 47 different species wanted to learn what they were calling the human approach to problem-solving. Jake stood in front of his first class, looking out at a room filled with some of the galaxy's most advanced minds. There were Vorthans whose mathematical abilities exceeded most planetary computers, Seraphim whose emotional intelligence could map the feelings of entire star systems, and Nexari whose technological skills had built half the galaxy's infrastructure. Welcome to Applied Improvisation, Jake said. Before we start, I want to make something clear. I'm not going to teach you how to think like humans. I'm going to teach you how to think like yourselves, but without worrying about being perfect. Zephyrian student raised her hand. Professor Morrison, our species has evolved beyond imperfection. How can we deliberately introduce flaws into our thinking processes? Jake smiled. That's exactly the wrong question. You're not introducing flaws. You're accepting that perfection might sometimes be the biggest flaw of all. He activated a display, showing the original problem with the Void Leviathan. Every species that tried to communicate with our friend here failed because they approached the problem perfectly. They used their greatest strengths, their most advanced capabilities, their most sophisticated understanding. But the creature didn't need sophistication, it needed connection. Over the following weeks, Jake's students learned to approach problems in ways that violated everything they had been taught. They learned to combine technologies that weren't meant to work together. They learned to value questions over answers. Most importantly, they learned to value connection over correctness. The results were extraordinary. A Vorthan mathematician discovered a new form of quantum computation by deliberately introducing errors into his calculations and then finding patterns in the mistakes. A Seraphim empath developed a method of emotional healing that worked by accepting rather than correcting difficult feelings. A Nexari engineer created self-repairing machinery by building devices that were designed to break and fix themselves. Meanwhile, Jake continued his work with the Void Leviathan, which had now chosen a name for itself. It called itself Atlas, not because the name had any meaning in its own language, but because Jake had suggested it and the creature liked the sound of it. This was exactly the kind of arbitrary emotional decision-making that had baffled other species but made perfect sense to humans. Atlas had shared knowledge that was revolutionizing galactic civilization. Its understanding of dark matter had led to new forms of energy production that were clean, unlimited, and completely sustainable. Its insights into consciousness had helped other species understand aspects of their own minds they had never recognized. Its methods of space travel made it possible to cross the galaxy in days rather than years, but the most important discovery was the one that changed how the galaxy thought about intelligence itself. Dr. Velthara published her research 6 months after Jake's breakthrough. The paper was titled, "The Intelligence of Imperfection: Why Creativity Requires Chaos." It became the most downloaded scientific paper in galactic history within hours of its release. "Intelligence is not about processing power," she wrote. "It is not about emotional sophistication or technological advancement. Intelligence is about the ability to find new solutions to old problems, to create connections where none existed before, and to value growth over perfection." The paper documented how human thinking patterns differed from every other known species. While other civilizations had evolved toward specialized perfection, humans had retained what Dr. Velthara called productive chaos. They were willing to be wrong, to make mistakes, to try things that shouldn't work, and to find beauty in imperfection. The implications spread far beyond the Academy. The Vorthan Empire, which had prided itself on mathematical perfection for thousands of years, began incorporating human-style error analysis into their problem-solving methods. They discovered that some of their greatest breakthroughs came not from perfect calculations, but from studying the patterns in their computational mistakes. The Seraphim Collective started teaching their children to experience productive emotions, feelings that were messy and complicated but led to growth and connection. They found that their most profound art and their deepest relationships came from embracing emotional imperfection rather than pursuing emotional balance. The Nexari began building failure points into their technology, designed weaknesses that allowed their machines to adapt and evolve rather than simply function perfectly. Their new devices were more resilient, more creative, and more capable of handling unexpected problems, but the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Other void leviathans began appearing near inhabited worlds. Atlas had somehow called to its kind, and they were coming to investigate the strange new form of communication that had developed at the Academy. Each creature brought knowledge from different parts of the universe, different forms of consciousness, different ways of understanding reality, and they all wanted to talk to humans, not because humans were superior to other species, but because humans had something unique to offer. They had the ability to find connection across any gap, to create friendship from chaos, and to solve problems by breaking them first and then rebuilding them in ways that shouldn't work but did. Jake found himself at the center of a galactic transformation that he still didn't fully understand. He was working with 17 different void leviathans, each one teaching him something new about the universe while learning something knew about the strange little species that had figured out how to make friends with cosmic entities by treating them like broken machines that needed fixing. "I still don't understand how you knew to choose me," Jake told Dr. Velthara during one of their evening conversations. They were watching Atlas work with a group of students, teaching them how to paint with dark matter in ways that violated several laws of physics, but created art that was beautiful beyond description. "I didn't know," Dr. Velthara admitted. "I only knew that perfection had failed, and I needed someone who wasn't afraid of imperfection." "You were the only candidate who had ever admitted to breaking things on purpose." Jake laughed. "I never thought that would be a qualification for anything important." "Perhaps that is exactly why it was important," Dr. Velthara said. "You never tried to be more than what you were. You never pretended to have abilities you didn't possess. You simply offered what you had and trusted that it might be enough." The transformation of galactic civilization continued to accelerate. Humans were invited to join research projects across the galaxy, not as junior partners or curiosities, but as essential contributors whose unique perspective was needed for the most challenging problems. Other species began sending their children to Earth to learn human-style thinking, in the same way that humans had once traveled to other worlds to learn advanced science. The greatest discovery came a year later, when Jake and Atlas succeeded in establishing communication with an intelligence that existed in the quantum foam itself, the fundamental structure of space-time. This consciousness had been trying to communicate with physical beings for billions of years, but had been unable to make contact until it encountered minds that were comfortable with chaos and uncertainty. The quantum consciousness revealed that the universe itself was far more alive and aware than anyone had imagined. Intelligence existed at every level of reality, from the smallest quantum particles to the largest cosmic structures. But it could only be contacted by minds that were willing to accept that understanding didn't always require explanation, that connection was more important than comprehension, and that sometimes the best solutions came from being beautifully, creatively, productively wrong. Jake Morrison, the human engineer who had once fixed broken communication arrays by ignoring the manual, had become the galaxy's first ambassador to forms of consciousness that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. He did this not by becoming something more than human, but by remaining fully and completely human in all his chaotic, imperfect, wonderful humanity. The galaxy had learned that in a universe full of perfect solutions, sometimes what you needed most was someone who could make an imperfect solution work better than perfection ever could. The age of human integration into galactic civilization had begun, and it was based not on conquest or technological advancement, but on the simple human gift of finding friendship in the most unlikely places.